The Mystery of St. Matthew Island by Susan E. Quinlan. Genre: expository text. Explain a person, a thing, or an idea. In this case study, investigators detail how they found answers to difficult questions or solutions to difficult problems. As you read, notice how scientists go about solving a mystery. Question of the week: what unexpected effects can humans have on nature? When 29 reindeer were released on St. Matthew Island in 1944, the future of the herd seemed bright. This island in the midst of the Bering Sea offered plenty of plants and lichens for the reindeer to eat. No wolves, bears, or other large predators lived on the island. Biologists expected the herd to grow quickly, and it did. By 1963, just 19 years later, the herd numbered more than 6,000 animals. Then, something went terribly wrong. Sailors who visited St. Matthew to hunt reindeer in 1965 found the island littered with reindeer skeletons. They saw only a few live reindeer. When the sailors' disturbing report reached Dr. David Klein, a scientist who had studied the herd, he immediately made plans to investigate. Arranging transportation to the remote island was difficult. Located halfway between Alaska and Siberia, this American island is so far from anywhere that it is nearly impossible to reach. No one lives there, so the island has no airports, and it is too far offshore for small planes to venture. For most of the year, it is surrounded by polar sea ice, and thus unreachable even by boat. So it was over a year before Klein and two co-workers were able to reach the island by Coast Guard ship. With camping gear, food, and a promise that they would be picked up within 2 weeks, the investigators were left on the lonely shore. The first step of their investigation was to determine if the disaster report was true. On his 2 previous visits to St. Matthew years before, Klein had seen small groups of reindeer everywhere, but now the island was strangely still. The bleached skeletons of reindeer lay scattered across the tundra. Klein had a few suspicions about the disaster based on his earlier trips to the island. But to solve the mystery, he needed to conduct a thorough investigation. As a first step, the researchers explored the mountainous island. After several days of difficult hiking, they found that only 42 live animals remained on the entire island. All of these were adult females, except one scrawny adult male. There were no calves. The absence of calves meant that the lone male was unable to sire young, so the herd was doomed to disappear completely someday. When and how had the other 6,000 animals perished? And why had such a disaster happened to this once healthy herd? Perhaps there was a clue in the reindeer skeletons. Klein noticed that nearly all of the skeletons were in the same state of decay. That meant the entire herd had died at about the same time. Based on the moss growing on the bones and their bleached condition, Klein estimated that the carcasses had lain around for at least 3 years. Klein had counted 6,000 animals when he visited the island in summer 1963, so he concluded that the reindeer had died sometime between that summer and the summer of 1964. Klein examined the skeletons more carefully, hoping to find more clues about the date of the die-off. He soon found the tiny, newly formed bones of baby reindeer that had died while still inside their mothers. These tiny bones told Klein that the female reindeer had died in late winter, when their calves were still developing. With the time of death narrowed down to late winter 1963 through 1964, Klein searched for clues about the cause of death. No predators lived on the island, and people rarely visited. So neither of these potential killers were suspects in the case. Klein ruled out diseases and parasites because he had found almost no signs of disease or parasites on his earlier visits to St. Matthew. And it was not possible that an infected animal from somewhere else had brought in any disease or parasite. St. Matthew Island is too remote. Klein found skeletons from animals of all ages. Therefore, old age was not the cause of the die-off either. That left weather and starvation as possible causes. Weather seemed likely to be involved. The 1963 through 64 winter included some of the deepest snows and the coldest temperatures ever recorded in the Bering Sea area. But Klein thought a severe winter alone should not have caused such a massive die-off. Reindeer are Arctic animals. As long as they have enough food, most healthy reindeer should be able to survive, even in a severe winter. Thus, Klein suspected that the St. Matthew Island reindeer had been unhealthy or had run out of food during the winter of 1963 through 64. With this thought in mind, Klein looked for evidence of starvation in the skeletons. An important clue lay hidden inside the bones. A well-fed animal has fat in its bone marrow. This fatty marrow remains in the bones for 5 years or more after an animal dies. Knowing this, Klein cracked open the leg bones of the skeletons to examine the marrow. Bone after bone, skeleton after skeleton, the marrow was completely gone. None of the animals had fat in their bone marrow when they died. This was clear evidence that the herd had starved to death. When Klein visited the island 3 years earlier, he had noticed that some important winter food plants of the reindeer looked overgrazed. When he looked around this time, he noticed more severe damage. Many of the small plants looked as if they had been clipped back, and lichens, moss-like organisms that once carpeted the island, were now absent from many areas. Klein observed that the most serious damage was on hilltops and ridges, where winds keep the ground snow free in winter. Such places would have been used heavily by reindeer during winter. The damaged plant life had led Klein to suspect that the reindeer had run out of nutritious food. Knowing that a lack of healthy food would show up in the weights of the reindeer, Klein reviewed the records from his earlier visits to St. Matthew. The animals he had examined in 1957 weighed 199 to 404 pounds, more than most reindeer elsewhere. Clearly, the animals had plenty of food then. In contrast, the reindeer Klein had weighed in 1963 averaged 50 to 120 pounds less in weight. These lower weights showed that when the herd had numbered 6,000 animals, many of the reindeer were not getting enough to eat. Klein next weighed a few of the live reindeer that remained on the island. These animals still weighed less than normal. They were not getting enough good food. That clinched the case. Klein was now certain what had happened. Without predators or disease to limit its numbers, the small reindeer herd had grown quickly. Many young were born, and all the animals had plenty to eat. But after a few years, there were too many animals. The reindeer ate and trampled the tundra plants and lichens faster than these could grow. Crowded onto the windswept ridges in winter, the large herd destroyed the lush lichen carpet. When the most nutritious plants and lichens became scarce, the reindeer began to lose weight. In poor condition and with little food to sustain them, disaster was inevitable. The harsh winter of 1963 through 64 spelled the end for the once healthy herd. The St. Matthew Island reindeer had literally eaten themselves out of house and home. By their numbers alone, they had destroyed their island home and their future. When Klein and his co-workers left St. Matthew Island, they brought with them an important understanding of the connections between animals and their environment. Populations of all living things can skyrocket in numbers, like the reindeer herd. Usually, however, animal numbers are kept in check by predators, parasites, and diseases, or other factors. The mystery of the St. Matthew Island reindeer showed that in the absence of these natural checks, a growing population eventually destroys its own environment, and disaster strikes.